welcome to Haunted Midnight. I upload true stories every week on my channel, so if you enjoy this video, check out my other videos. Before we begin, over 90% of you are not subscribed. It would be amazing if you guys can subscribe and support me, as I am still a small channel. Thank you for watching. I never thought a Craigslist rental could turn my life upside down, but here I am, still trying to make sense of everything. It all started when I was searching for a new apartment after my lease at my old place expired unexpectedly. I was in a hurry, not having a lot of savings for a down payment, and I needed something affordable in a decent neighborhood. Scrolling through Craigslist, I saw an ad for a one-bedroom apartment in an older building in a part of town I'd always considered safe. The rent was shockingly low, almost a steal, and the pictures made the place look charming with natural light streaming through large windows and hardwood floors that looked well maintained. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but desperate times call for taking risks. The first time I visited the apartment, everything felt too good to be true. The building was old but had character, and the landlord, a middle-aged man who didn't have any airs about him, met me at the door. I remember thinking how normal it all seemed. He gave me a quick tour and even pointed out some quirky details about the building's history, like a resident from the 70s who'd used to live there. I felt a sense of ease, like maybe this was my lucky break. I signed the lease that same day and handed over a security deposit that seemed huge at the time, but which I could barely afford. I was excited to start this new chapter in my life. Within the first few days, little things began to nag at me. It started with odd noises in the middle of the night that I initially dismissed as the building settling or maybe the neighbor's loud TV. But soon I started noticing that things weren't quite right. Items in the apartment would move from one spot to another. At first, I thought I was just tired, or that my memory was playing tricks on me. But then I would catch glimpses of something, shadowy movements out of the corner of my eye. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and the stress of the move. I kept telling myself that it was just a new place and that I needed to adjust. After a week, the unsettling feeling grew stronger. I began to wonder if there was something wrong with the apartment itself. I would come home to find things misplaced, or sometimes a window slightly open that I had firmly closed before leaving. I started documenting these small inconsistencies, trying to rationalize them as nothing more than coincidences. Yet deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The building had its charms, but it also had creaks and groans that sounded almost like footsteps in the dark hallways. I tried not to let it get to me, focusing instead on settling in and making the apartment my own. One night, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a soft rustling sound coming from the closet. My heart raced as I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I got up to check and found nothing unusual, just the clutter of old clothes and random knickknacks I had collected over the years. However, over the next few nights, the noises continued, and I began to feel that my personal space was no longer safe. I remember sitting on my worn-out couch, questioning every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind. There was an eerie sensation that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Things escalated quickly. I started receiving strange, unmarked letters slip under my door. They were brief, with no return address, and contained vague statements that seemed to hint at knowing details about my day-to-day life. At first, I dismissed them as some form of prank. Maybe someone had been watching me. The idea was both absurd and terrifying. I kept the letters hidden away, trying to pretend that I was overreacting. But then, one morning, I found my keys missing. Panic surged through me as I retraced my steps. The keys reappeared later that day, left on my kitchen counter as if placed there by an unseen hand. I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that someone was meddling with my life. Despite all this, I still clung to the hope that there was a logical explanation behind it all. I began to research the building's history online and discovered a few odd mentions in local forums about past tenants who had experienced similar disturbances. It didn't add up, and I couldn't help but feel that I had unwittingly stepped into a situation far beyond a simple bad apartment. The landlord, who had seemed so friendly and accommodating at first, was now even more elusive. When I tried to ask him about the odd occurrences, he brushed it off with vague reassurances that everything was fine. His dismissive attitude only deepened my suspicion that there was more to the story than I knew. I spent nights scouring online reviews and local message boards, trying to piece together any pattern or explanation for the events that were unraveling in my apartment. I learned that a few years ago, there had been a series of similar complaints, but nothing concrete had ever come of them. Every attempt I made to reach out to former tenants or neighbors was met with silence or an eerie reluctance to discuss the topic. It felt as though the building itself was shrouded in secrets that I wasn't meant to uncover. I began to feel isolated, as if I was trapped in a web of mystery that had no easy escape. One particularly cold and gloomy evening, the feeling of dread reached a new peak. I was alone in the apartment when I noticed the lights flickering and a cold draft sweeping through the room. I turned on every light, closed every window, and yet the unsettling chill persisted. It wasn't just the physical cold, it was a deeper psychological chill that made me question if I was the only person in the building who was truly aware of the strange happenings. The more I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, the more I felt like I was being lured into a trap. It became increasingly hard to differentiate between my imagination and a tangible presence that was slowly taking over my sanctuary. At this point, I wasn't sure if I was experiencing a breakdown or if something truly sinister was lurking in the shadows of that apartment. The late-night noises, the moving objects, the inexplicable letters, that all built up into an overwhelming sense of paranoia. I couldn't help but wonder if the landlord had purposely set this up to scare tenants away, or if there was something far more twisted at play. Every detail, every small anomaly, started to paint a picture of a meticulously orchestrated situation designed to unsettle and control. I kept a journal, jotting down every incident in detail, trying to maintain some semblance of rationality in the face of growing terror. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, constantly on alert for the slightest sound or movement, and days filled with a lingering anxiety that made even mundane tasks seem monumental. I was caught in a loop of suspicion and fear, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling of being manipulated by unseen forces wouldn't let me go. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when my life began to unravel in that apartment. It was a gradual descent into an unsettling reality where every shadow held a secret and every creak in the floor was a warning. I still don't know what the true nature of the disturbances was, whether it was a deliberate ploy by a crafty landlord or something inexplicably supernatural. What I do know is that my trust in what I saw online and in person was forever shattered. I eventually had to leave that apartment, but the scars, both mental and emotional, remain with me. I'm sharing this account not because I want pity, but because I believe that sometimes the things that seem too good to be true are exactly that. I'm still trying to piece together the mystery of that Craigslist rental and the dark force that seemed to inhabit it. It's a reminder that even in the seemingly mundane search for a new home, there can be hidden layers of danger that lurk just beneath the surface. I don't have all the answers, and I probably never will, but I hope that by telling my story, I can at least give someone else pause before diving into a deal that seems too perfect. My experience taught me that trust is fragile, and that sometimes the most ordinary situations can hide the most extraordinary horrors. I never expected that a simple Craigslist ad for a car would lead me into a nightmare that still haunts me today. I had been looking for a used car for a while, something affordable and reliable, because my old ride had finally given up on me. One afternoon, while scrolling through Craigslist on my phone, I came across an ad that immediately caught my eye. The car was a 1998 sedan, the price unbelievably low, and the pictures looked decent enough. I figured that if I acted fast, I could snag a bargain and get out of my transportation woes. At first, I brushed off the niggling feeling that something wasn't quite right about the ad. After all, Craigslist was full of bargains, and sometimes a great deal really does come along. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake off the thought that there might be more to this deal than met the eye. I arranged to meet the seller at a quiet parking lot on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, I saw the car parked under a dim streetlight. It looked as worn as one would expect for a car of its age, but nothing seemed overly alarming. The seller was a man in his early 40s, casually dressed and speaking in a laid-back manner. He explained that he had owned the car for years and was finally ready to let it go. Everything about the encounter seemed normal. I took a test drive, and the car ran surprisingly well for its age. I couldn't help but admire the potential of a good bargain, so I went ahead and handed him the cash he asked for without much hesitation. At first, I was thrilled with my new purchase. The car was an unexpected win, and I proudly drove it around town, feeling like I had outsmarted the system. However, it wasn't long before strange things began to happen. It started with minor details. I noticed that the interior of the car had odd scratches and marks in places where nothing should have been, as if someone had been handling it roughly or even trying to hide something. One day, while cleaning the car, I discovered a small compartment under the driver's seat that I hadn't noticed before. I opened it out of curiosity and found nothing but a few dusty receipts. I dismissed it as a quirk of the previous owner, maybe a storage spot for some trivial items. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this car held secrets. As weeks passed, the sense of unease grew. I started noticing things in the car that didn't belong: a scrap of paper with a phone number scribbled on it, a faded photograph tucked behind the seat, and even a bundle of old, discolored documents that looked like they had been hidden there for a long time. One morning, as I was driving to work, I caught a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye reflected in the rearview mirror. I slowed down and checked, but there was no one in sight. It left me unsettled, and I began to wonder if I was just imagining things. The turning point came on an overcast afternoon when I decided to take a shortcut through a quieter part of town. As I drove along a narrow, dimly lit street, I noticed that the car's radio began picking up strange, muffled static sounds even though I had turned it off moments before. The interference was accompanied by a sense of dread that seemed to seep into my bones. I pulled over to calm myself, but the feeling wouldn't subside. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the engine idling softly, and all I could think about was the hidden compartment I discovered and the odd items that had surfaced since then. One evening, as I parked the car in my driveway, I decided to give it a thorough cleaning in hopes of putting my mind at ease. While scrubbing the underside, I found yet another hidden compartment behind the door panel. This one was larger and sturdier than the one under the seat. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing several stacks of old photographs and what appeared to be records of transactions. The photos were disturbing, a series of candid shots of people, some taken in dim, unrecognizable settings, and others showing familiar faces that I couldn't quite place. Alongside them were receipts and handwritten notes, all in a language that I couldn't decipher. I felt like I had stumbled upon a secret that someone had desperately tried to hide. I started piecing together a theory in my mind. Perhaps the car wasn't just a mode of transportation. Maybe it was being used as a mobile repository for illicit activity. I began to recall vague details from my initial meeting with the seller. His casual demeanor now seemed off, as if he had been concealing something significant. I scoured the internet for any mention of a series of unsolved crimes or disappearances connected to a vehicle like mine, but nothing concrete turned up. I was left with the unsettling realization that I might have unwittingly become part of something dangerous, something that transcended a mere car sale gone wrong. My curiosity quickly turned to fear. I started avoiding driving the car, leaving it parked in my garage for days at a time while I tried to decide what to do next. Every time I looked at it, I felt a mixture of regret and terror, as if the car was a living entity that had somehow ensnared me in its dark web. I kept telling myself that there had to be a logical explanation, that maybe I was just being paranoid, but deep down I knew that I had stepped into something far more sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me through the car's still, unblinking headlights. Late one night, driven by a mix of desperation and dread, I decided to contact a friend who worked in law enforcement. I hesitated for a long time, fearing that I might be overreacting, but eventually I sent him a message explaining everything. I described the hidden compartments, the disturbing photographs, and the odd receipts. I even mentioned the strange static on the radio and the shadow in the rearview mirror. He told me to hang on and promised to look into it, but I never heard back from him for days. The silence only fueled my anxiety, and every passing hour felt like a step deeper into an unending nightmare. During those long, sleepless nights, I began to realize that the car had fundamentally changed my perception of reality. I would catch myself staring at it, almost as if it was daring me to uncover more secrets. The once exciting thrill of having found an amazing deal had turned into a suffocating burden. I spent hours researching online, trying to connect the dots between the cryptic receipts and the photos, but every lead ended in a dead end. It felt like the car was a puzzle designed to trap me in an inescapable labyrinth of uncertainty and fear. In the end, I made the difficult decision to get rid of the car. I couldn't risk being associated with something that was clearly not just an ordinary used vehicle. I arranged for a discreet sale through another Craigslist ad, ensuring that I wouldn't have to deal with any more unexpected surprises. The day I handed over the keys, I felt a bittersweet sense of relief and loss. I had been drawn into a web of mystery and darkness, and now by parting ways with the car, I was attempting to reclaim a semblance of normalcy. Even now, months later, I'm left with lingering questions and a profound sense of unease. I still wonder about the true purpose of that car, the identities behind the photographs, and the fate of those mysterious transactions. I know I may never get all the answers, but I'm certain of one thing. The experience changed me. It forced me to confront the reality that sometimes what appears to be a simple deal on Craigslist can hide layers of horror that are far beyond what I could have ever imagined. I share this story not as a cautionary tale, but as a raw account of how quickly an everyday transaction can turn into a disturbing ordeal that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, danger, and the hidden corners of the internet. I still remember the day I stumbled upon the job listing on Craigslist like it was yesterday. I was unemployed and desperate for any opportunity that could help me pay my bills. Scrolling through the endless postings late one night, I came across an ad that caught my attention. It wasn't flashy or overly detailed. It simply stated that a position was available for someone to help with various administrative tasks at a small company in a quiet part of town. The ad promised high pay for minimal work and mentioned that training would be provided. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but my desperation made me overlook any warning signs. I sent in my application and, to my surprise, received a reply almost immediately with an invitation to an interview. The interview was held in an old, nondescript building that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. I walked in, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety, and was greeted by a person who introduced themselves simply as the manager. There was nothing overtly alarming about the meeting, aside from the manager's vague answers about what the company actually did. They explained that I would be doing a variety of tasks, from data entry to organizing files, but every time I asked for more specifics, I was met with a shrug or a dismissive remark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something unfamiliar, but the high pay and the promise of flexibility made me sign on without a second thought. My first day on the job was uneventful at first. I was given a set of instructions, a folder filled with paperwork, and a small desk in a cramped office space that was located in the back of the building. The office was dimly lit, and the silence was almost oppressive. The tasks were simple enough: sort through documents, fill in spreadsheets, and make copies. But as the days went on, I started noticing odd discrepancies in the work I was doing. Some documents contained redacted sections that made no sense, and there were files with coded language that I couldn't decipher. I mentioned these oddities to the manager, but my concerns were brushed aside with a vague promise that I would understand more as time went on. The unsettling feeling grew stronger with each passing day. I began to notice that the workload varied dramatically. One day I would be given a manageable amount of work, and on other days I would find my desk piled high with folders and files that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The tasks were repetitive and monotonous, yet they carried a weight that I couldn't explain. I would sit at my desk for hours, feeling as if there was something hidden beneath the surface of the documents, a secret that someone was desperately trying to keep locked away. Late one night, when the office was nearly empty, I stayed back to finish up some work. As I sat alone in the dim glow of my computer screen, I began to notice that the documents I was reviewing contained references to names and dates that I had no idea about. There were mentions of meetings, coded abbreviations, and strange references to transactions that didn't add up. I spent that night scouring the files, trying to piece together a narrative from the fragments of information. What I discovered was a labyrinth of connections that pointed to a network of activities that felt both illegal and morally ambiguous. I started wondering if the job was a front for something much more sinister than simple administrative work. I felt torn between wanting to quit and being too afraid of what might happen if I walked away. The high pay was hard to ignore, and there was a nagging curiosity inside me that kept pushing me to learn more. I began staying after hours to dig deeper, scanning through old files and trying to decipher the coded language. I felt like I was in over my head, but there was no turning back. Every night, as I pored over the documents, I felt a growing sense of dread. It wasn't just that I was uncovering something disturbing. It was the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was alone in the empty office. Over time, I started to notice small details that added to my paranoia. There were days when I would find that my desk was rearranged, as if someone had been rifling through my work while I was away. I began to receive anonymous notes left on my desk with vague warnings, urging me not to ask too many questions. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself that it was all a misunderstanding or perhaps a misguided attempt at humor by someone at the company. But deep down, I knew that these were not ordinary occurrences. The air in the office grew heavy, and every creak of the old building made me jump in my seat. My heart would race whenever I saw the manager walk by my desk, his expression unreadable and his eyes avoiding any real conversation. It became clear that I wasn't the only one who had started noticing these oddities. Other employees, usually silent and withdrawn, seemed to share the same haunted look in their eyes. I didn't talk to them much, not out of choice, but because a sense of fear kept us all isolated. The atmosphere was one of quiet desperation, as if everyone was silently acknowledging that something was terribly wrong, but no one dared to speak up. One evening, after another particularly long and exhausting day, I stayed back to finish a batch of files. The building was eerily quiet, and I could hear the distant hum of the heating system mixing with the sound of my own breathing. As I worked, I found myself drawn to a set of documents that were more detailed than the others. They outlined a series of transactions that involved large sums of money and transfers between accounts in different cities. The more I read, the more I felt that I was witnessing evidence of something criminal, money laundering, perhaps, or a network of fraudulent activities designed to siphon funds without detection. At that moment, my mind raced with conflicting thoughts. I wanted to confront the manager, to demand answers, but the fear of what I might uncover held me back. I decided instead to copy the documents and keep them hidden, hoping that I could piece together the puzzle over time. Every day after that, I became more cautious. I kept my work discreet and avoided drawing attention to myself. I no longer stayed after hours unless absolutely necessary, but the lingering sense of unease continued to haunt me even when I left the building at the end of the day. The turning point came when I received a cryptic email on my personal account, sent from an address I didn't recognize. It contained a single sentence: "You're in too deep to walk away now." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that my efforts to uncover the truth had not gone unnoticed. The email made it clear that I was being monitored, and that there were people with far more power than me who didn't appreciate my curiosity. Fear and panic surged through me, and I knew that my life would never be the same. I made the decision to quit the job immediately, but I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving was only the beginning of a much larger ordeal. In the days that followed, I found myself looking over my shoulder, constantly anxious that someone would follow me home. I was haunted by the thought that I had become entangled in a web of corruption and crime that I couldn't escape from. I had hoped that the allure of high pay would be a lifeline during tough times, but it turned out to be a trap that dragged me into a dark underworld hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary job. Now, as I reflect on those turbulent months, I am left with a mix of regret and lingering fear. I still have the hidden copies of the documents tucked away, a reminder of the secrets that I uncovered. I'm not sure if I should have taken a stand or remained silent, but I know that this experience has changed me irrevocably. I share this story not as a warning or a lesson, but simply as a raw account of how an ordinary Craigslist job opportunity spiraled into something that I could have never imagined. I walk away from it all with a heavy heart and a cautious mind, forever wary of deals that seem too good to be true. At first, our messages were light and playful. We talked about music, favorite movies, and the kind of small-town quirks that make life interesting. I felt an instant connection that I hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a vulnerability in her words that made me want to know everything about her, and I responded with equal openness, sharing details of my own life that I had kept hidden from most people. Our conversations flowed naturally, and it wasn't long before we decided to meet in person. I was excited but also nervous, as I always am when stepping out of my comfort zone. Our first meeting was in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, a neutral spot where we could both feel safe. I arrived early, rehearsing what I might say, and waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked in, she looked even more genuine than her photos had suggested. We exchanged a few smiles and started talking, and the connection that we had built online seemed to blossom right there in front of me. I left that day feeling like I had found someone special, someone who could truly understand me. Over the next few weeks, we met several more times, exploring the city, sharing our dreams, and even discussing our darkest fears. I began to think that this might be the start of something real. However, as the days turned into weeks, things started to take a turn that I hadn't anticipated. I became increasingly fixated on every detail of our interactions. I find myself replaying our conversations over and over in my mind, analyzing every word, every pause. I started following her on social media, which was something I hadn't intended to do at first, but curiosity got the better of me. I found little snippets of her life that seemed normal at first, a few photos with friends, posts about her day. But then I started noticing inconsistencies. There were days when she would post pictures that suggested she was out having fun with friends. Yet she would later claim she had been alone all day when we met. I brushed it off as simple miscommunication at first, but then a nagging suspicion crept in. My interest quickly turned into obsession. I began checking her online profiles at odd hours, trying to piece together a timeline of her life that made sense. I started comparing the information from Craigslist with what I saw online, and little details began to conflict. There were posts and photos that didn't match the personality she had projected in our conversations. I found old profiles that used different names, and some of her posts were oddly vague about her location. I couldn't tell if it was a case of a mysterious past or if I was just reading too much into harmless quirks. Still, the feeling that something was off was hard to shake. I rationalized my behavior by telling myself that I needed to know the truth before I let myself fall too deep. One evening, I decided to drive to a park she had mentioned in our chats, a place that seemed to hold sentimental value for her. I wanted to see if I could find any clues about her past, maybe even run into someone who knew her. The park was nearly empty, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. As I walked along a quiet path, I noticed a group of people gathered near a bench. I recognized one of them from a photo she had once posted. My heart began to race as I approached, hoping that maybe they could help explain the inconsistencies I had uncovered. I tried to talk to them, but they were evasive and quickly dispersed when they saw me. It was then that I realized I had stepped into a situation much larger than I had anticipated. I began to document every encounter, every odd detail that added to my growing anxiety. I kept a journal where I noted every message, every photograph, every discrepancy I found. The act of writing it all down gave me a false sense of control, but deep down, I felt increasingly trapped by my own obsession. Every time I received a new message from her, I was torn between the desire for connection and the fear that I was being deceived. I found myself waiting by the phone for hours, analyzing the timing and tone of her messages. The line between genuine interest and paranoia became increasingly blurred. It wasn't just the inconsistencies in her online persona that unsettled me. There were moments during our in-person meetings that now, in retrospect, feel strangely contrived. There were times when she would seem distracted, almost as if she was hiding something just beneath the surface of her smile. I began to wonder if our meetings were meticulously planned to keep me hooked without revealing too much. I started to question every detail. Why did she always suggest the same places? Why did she avoid talking about her past? And why did she seem to vanish for days at a time without explanation? My mind raced with scenarios, each more disturbing than the last. At some point, I realized that I had isolated myself from friends and family. I stopped meeting up with others and spent my evenings poring over her digital footprint. I felt a mix of guilt and helplessness, knowing that my obsession was spiraling out of control, yet unable to break free from the need to know more about her. I even attempted to reach out to her through other channels, but she always responded with vague, non-committal answers. It was as if she was deliberately maintaining a distance, keeping just enough of herself hidden to fuel my suspicions. One night, as I sat in my darkened room with only the glow of my computer screen for company, I received a message that made my heart sink. It was a short note, almost cryptic in its brevity. "Stop looking." The message didn't specify what I was doing wrong, but it was clear that my actions had not gone unnoticed. I was terrified and felt exposed, as if she had somehow been watching my every move. The email came from an address I didn't recognize, not even one I had seen before in our correspondence. It sent a jolt through me, confirming that I had pushed too far, that there were forces at work I hadn't anticipated. After that message, our communication changed abruptly. The warmth and familiarity that had once defined our interactions evaporated, replaced by a cold, distant formality. I tried to salvage what I could, reaching out multiple times, but the connection that I had so desperately clung to was gone. In its place was a void filled with unanswered questions and mounting regret. I realized that in my quest for connection, I had crossed boundaries that perhaps were never meant to be crossed. I had allowed my loneliness and desperation to override my judgment, and now I was left to face the consequences of my actions alone. Even now, I sometimes wonder who she really was and what she had been hiding. Some mysteries, I have come to learn, are best left unsolved. I never imagined that a bargain antique I found on Craigslist could turn my life into a living nightmare. I was clearing out some space in my tiny apartment when I started browsing through various listings for unique items. I've always had a soft spot for antiques, especially those that come with a story. One particular ad caught my eye, a beautifully crafted wooden mirror with an intricate frame that was said to have belonged to a long-forgotten estate. The seller claimed it was a one-of-a-kind piece, priced unbelievably low. I felt a tug of excitement mixed with a bit of trepidation, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a chance. When I first saw the mirror in person, it looked even more captivating than the photos online. The wood was dark and weathered, carved with delicate patterns that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The seller, an older man with a tired expression, gave me a brief rundown of the piece's history, a tale of a family who had lost everything to a series of unfortunate events, leaving behind only this mirror as a memento of better times. His tone was matter-of-fact, and though his story felt incomplete, I chalked it up to the natural gaps in family lore and the passage of time. I handed in the cash without a second thought, feeling like I had scored a rare find. At first, the mirror was just a beautiful addition to my living room. I hung it on the wall, admiring its craftsmanship, and over the first few days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. However, as the evenings grew longer and shadows deeper, I began noticing small, unsettling details. It started with the way the mirror seemed to catch reflections that weren't my own. A fleeting glimpse of a figure standing behind me, a distortion in the glass that made everything look warped. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as tricks of the light, a product of my tired eyes after long workdays. As time went on, the oddities became harder to ignore. I began to feel an inexplicable chill every time I walked past the mirror. I would sometimes catch my reflection looking back at me with an expression that wasn't entirely my own, a frown or a look of sorrow that I couldn't explain. There were nights when I'd wake up to find the mirror positioned slightly askew, as if someone had deliberately moved it in the dark hours. I remember one particularly unsettling evening when, after a long day, I sat in my living room and noticed that the mirror's surface seemed to ripple, much like the surface of a pond disturbed by a gentle breeze. My heart pounded as I watched, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. I tried to rationalize everything. I told myself that it was just an old mirror, full of quirks and imperfections, that my mind was overanalyzing. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at work. I began to dig into the mirror's past, searching for any mention of curses or legends associated with the item. The only information I found was the vague story provided by the seller and a few online references to a haunted mirror in local folklore. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. It wasn't much, but it planted a seed of doubt that grew every time I passed by it. Strange things started happening in my apartment. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in bizarre places. I'd open a drawer or a cabinet and find items that I was sure I had put away elsewhere. Sometimes I would even find small scratches on the mirror's frame that weren't there before, as if something or someone had been running their fingernails along it. I became convinced that the mirror was somehow connected to these disturbances. It was as if the object was alive, absorbing the energy of the room and then releasing it in unpredictable bursts. I spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the mirror, trying to understand its secrets. One evening, I sat down with a notebook to record every incident, hoping that documenting the strange occurrences might help me find a pattern or a logical explanation. I wrote about the fleeting reflections, the inexplicable cold spots, and the mysterious scratches. I even noted the times when I felt watched, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. The act of writing provided a small measure of comfort, but it also confirmed that what I was experiencing wasn't simply in my head. The more I wrote, the more I began to fear that the mirror was drawing me into a web of its own design. The turning point came one stormy night when the power went out. The only light in my apartment was the intermittent flash of lightning through the window, which made the mirror's surface shimmer ominously. I remember huddling on my couch, listening to the thunder, when I suddenly felt an intense, almost physical pull toward the mirror. It was as if it was calling out to me, demanding attention. I couldn't move, locked in place by a mix of terror and fascination. In that moment, I swear I saw a face in the mirror, pale, sorrowful, and utterly lifelike. The eyes of the reflection seemed to beg for something, and I felt an inexplicable urge to understand its pain. For weeks after that night, my sleep was plagued with vivid, unsettling dreams. In those dreams, the mirror was a portal to a different time, a different place where voices whispered in a language I couldn't comprehend. I began to feel that the mirror was not merely reflecting my image, but also capturing fragments of the past, a past filled with loss, regret, and despair. The connection felt almost tangible, and I could no longer dismiss it as a trick of my imagination. The mirror had become a silent witness to something far darker than I had ever anticipated. Eventually, I made the decision to seek help, though I was too afraid to speak of the mirror's true nature. I confided in a close friend, describing the strange events without mentioning the object itself. He suggested that maybe I was overreacting, that old antiques were known to have quirks. But I knew deep down that what I was experiencing was far beyond mere superstition. I was caught between the desire to rid myself of the mirror and a morbid curiosity about what lay beneath its surface. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to part with it. Despite the fear, it had become an inextricable part of my existence, a puzzle that I was compelled to solve. Even now, I still live with that mirror hanging on my wall. Its presence is a constant reminder of the thin line between the ordinary and the inexplicable. I have no clear answers about its origins or the true nature of its curse, and I doubt I ever will. What I do know is that sometimes the allure of a good deal can lead you down a path filled with shadows and unanswered questions. I share this account not as a cautionary tale with a neat moral, but simply as a raw, unfiltered record of how an antique mirror changed my life. The mirror remains silent, its secrets locked away in the depths of its glass, and I continue to live with the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out the video on screen.